Over the last 2 weeks, we've been able to make our way through the first half of the book of Revelation, which is kind of flying kind of fast through the book. And we've got 2 more this week and next week to finish the remaining half of the book. So things are going to be getting interesting in terms of how do we do all of this. Where we've been, just sort of a quick little thumbnail sketch of where we've been. If you've been going along with us, the first time we spent a little time just looking at Revelation and popular culture. We'll do a little bit more of that today. But then we got into the book and found that the first vision in the book was actually a vision of the Christ who is present among the churches. That was one of the defining elements in Revelation, sort of the centrality of Jesus, the risen Christ, in the presence of his people. Then we looked at the 7 churches. What's going on in the lives of these people? I mean, some of them are harassed, some of them are struggling, some of them are way too comfortable, complacent, some are just trying to muddle along. And by the time we got to the end of that first session, we were there in the heavenly throne room, being invited into worship, singing Holy, 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 and Love Divine, all loves excelling, and casting down our golden crowns around the glassy sea. Last time, we picked up where we left off. And we were there in the heavenly throne room still, and we were introduced to Christ the Lamb. Worthy is Christ the Lamb who was slain, whose blood set us free to be people of God. You may have heard that kind of thing before. People were worshiping, singing praise to the Lamb. We went spinning around through the series of challenges represented by the 7 horsemen, but then we came back to the presence of God and the Lamb again, giving worship. And that's the way Revelation worked, was through these kind of spiraling, cascading series of images. To kind of get us back where we left off, another one of the hymns based on Revelation, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name. If you take a look at the lyrics to this one, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, let angels prostrate fall. I mean, there we're back in Revelation 5 again. We're kind of up there in the heavenly throne room, honoring Christ as the Lamb who reigns. Next little verse that I've got printed up here, crown him you martyrs of our God. That followed right after the 4 horsemen, where the martyrs under the altar were crying out for justice. The Revelation gives a voice to the victims. And then after that, the last verse, let every kindred, every tribe on this terrestrial ball. And there we're in Revelation 7, where people of every tribe and tongue and folk and nation are gathered around the heavenly throne rooms, giving praise to God. So we've got 4 chapters of Revelation, summarized in 4 verses. All hail the power of Jesus' name, let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Crown him, you martyrs of our God, who from his altar call. Extol the stem of Jesse's rod, and crown him Lord of all. Extol the stem of Jesse's rod, and crown him Lord of all. Let every kindred, every tribe on this terrestrial ball, to him all majesty ascribe, and crown him Lord of all. To him all majesty ascribe, and crown him Lord of all. A wild guess tells me you know that hymn. Even in parts, which is fantastic. I so appreciate congregations that sing. Because if you sing, chances are that Revelation is part of your own native language of faith. You may not be aware of it, but it is, informing the language and imagery that plays such an important role in your worship. Well, as we're taking a look now, where we're going to be picking up is with Revelation chapters 12, 13, and so on. And where I want to take a look now is where, as we get to the middle of the book, let's look at the scene that marks the end of Act 1 and the beginning of Act 2, if you like, in Revelation. It's the very end of Revelation chapter 11. Revelation chapter 11, I mean, if we'd actually been following along, we should have sung the Hallelujah chorus, because those are the lyrics. I wasn't sure if we could muster it unless I had all the music here. But
we could.
It's a Sunday during Lent, you know. Yeah. So if we're looking at the seventh trumpet, you know, at the end, near the end of chapter 11 there, you know, the seventh angel blew his trumpet, there were loud voices in heaven. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And then they go on, falling down before the throne, worshiping God. We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, who were and who was, for you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath came, the time for judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets, the saints, and all who fear your name, both small and great. And then look at this line. And for destroying those who destroy the earth. Now that's an important line in Revelation. To destroy the destroyers of the earth. Oftentimes, sort of in popular impressions, Revelation is about the destruction of the earth. It's about destroying the forces that destroy the earth. It's a double negative. It's a double negative. I mean, in Revelation, the power of evil is something like a cancer that invades the body. You know, where you've got something that is at work in the body and is robbing the body of life. And so as part of cancer treatment, the idea is, how do you destroy what's destroying you so that life can thrive? That's where the double negative comes in. Is that how do you eliminate the forces of destruction so that life can flourish? That's consistent with God's creative purposes. We were introduced as God as creator in chapter 4. The reason why people were singing holy, holy, holy and casting down their golden crowns around the glassy sea was because God had created all things by his will. They came into existence and now live. You know, that's God is the source of life. When we get to the New Jerusalem at the end of next time, we're going to hear the announcement that God not only makes all things, but makes all things new, that God is the renewer of life. And in between, the challenge then is, how do you deal with those forces that are robbing the creation of life, that are robbing human beings of life and health and dignity, in order that God's purposes as creator and life giver can be realized. That's what we're going to be taking a look at. This conflict with the forces that rob the earth of life. Because life is God's goal, ultimately. Now, as we get into the chapters that follow, a lot of powerful imagery here. And we'll be taking a look at Revelation's word pictures. The initial one here that I had is sort of looking at the beast and the harlot. Those are going to be two of the images that we'll take a look at today. This one comes from a medieval manuscript. There are lots of fascinating medieval illustrations of figures in Revelation. And these will be the two that we'll take a look at today, which are some of the most controversial ones in Revelation. Now, when we get to chapter 13, let's pick up there. We're not going to have time to do everything, but let's at least take a look at chapter 13, where we'll get into the image of the beast, which is one of these images that has fascinated people for centuries. Very last little bit there in Revelation chapter 12, the verse 18 there, it talks about the dragon. Satan is the dragon. In chapter 12, Satan was cast down from heaven. And then it says, the dragon, namely Satan, took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. And on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it its power and its throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. Wow. strange imagery. Well, as we're looking at the beast and what it means for Revelation and the understanding of Revelation, this is one of those places where Revelation is again using picture language. I know some folks find picture language frustrating. Couldn't you just be a little bit more straightforward? You know, just get to the point, will you? I mean, evil is bad, it's out there, stay away from it. You know, that would just you know, don't confuse us with all of this pictorial stuff. And so it's interesting to think a little bit about how does this picture language work? Now, in terms of popular culture, this image of the beast is often, you know, identified with the Antichrist. I mean, it's one of those standard features that kind of circulates as far as, you know, popular speculation about the end of time. I mean, you know, is the Antichrist alive today? You know, here you find the sort of the number 666, which is associated with the beast, some kind of beady eyes peering out there, you know, a missile, nuclear stuff, all sort of interreligious conflict and that kind of thing. The mark, well, the beast puts its mark on human beings, claims them, you know, for the forces of evil. This is one of the things in the Left Behind series. The beast rules the world is that one. I mean, it's interesting, just the word Antichrist is actually never used in Revelation.
No.
But just for the record, it's never there. It actually comes from 1st and 2nd John, those little letters of John. And it's interesting, in 1st and 2nd John, the word Antichrist is never used for some mysterious figure who exerts world domination. It's used for people who have trouble with the humanity of Jesus. It's a strange sort of a thing, you know, that they're the ones who downplay the humanity of Jesus. They find that a problem. I mean, but anyway, that gets blended in. What people back in the 2nd, 3rd century were doing were trying to form a kind of composite picture of evil. So they took the word Antichrist out of 1st and 2nd John. They combined it with the image of the beast, this tyrannical figure in Revelation chapter 13, and then in turn connected that with the man of lawlessness, some horrific figure who appears in 2 Thessalonians 2. And so by bouncing from 1st and 2nd John over to Revelation and back to 2 Thessalonians 2, they created the picture of the Antichrist. So just for the record, I'm just going to stick with Revelation if that's okay. I'm not doing Bible pinball here. I'm trying to stick with this, you know. Just sorry. Now, you know, sort of going out on the net, I mean, some of the end time sites. This is the way in which, if we were working with a literal picture of the beast as we find it in Revelation, that's what we would see. This monster that's got the 7 heads, the 10 horns, feet like a bear, body like a leopard, and so on, coming up out of the sea. That's the way in which the picture of the beast would look if you tried to represent it artistically. And what's interesting is that in a lot of popular culture, you find this insistence that you have to take the Bible literally, you have to take the Bible literally, you have to take it literally. And absolutely no one is waiting for CNN, or somebody said Fox News, not even Fox News, is ready to be waiting for there to see some creature lumbering up out of the Atlantic Ocean, heading straight for the Pentagon. I mean, nobody is waiting for this. In terms of the Left Behind series, I don't know, you've probably not been watching the Left Behind series, but in terms of if you did, you know, get it on DVD or something, this is the way in which the Antichrist is pictured in Left Behind. Okay, so this is a literal rendition of that. Okay? So even in Left Behind, where they keep saying you have to take the Bible literally, what this is a fellow who has a thick Eastern European accent, who's kind of a holdover from the Cold War, who's waiting to ingratiate himself to the powers of the world, infiltrate the United Nations, and conduct a terrorist operation throughout the Middle East and elsewhere. And the way in which Tim LaHaye, who's the architect of the Left Behind series, says, since there are no 7-headed animals, this composite picture of a leopard, lion, and bear must be and look at that evil word, a symbol. I'm just quoting here. And the interesting thing is, I would say, I agree. You know? The question is, how does that picture language work? Not is it pictorial, not is it symbolic, but how does it work? That's the question. So, as I'm looking at this, I find that there are actually aspects of popular culture that might help us here. That as we're thinking about how these word pictures operate, in our context, we often do use word pictures to shape our perceptions of things, to shape the perceptions of the world in which we live. I mean, if you're looking through, you're looking at reading the front page of the newspaper or whatever. When you get into the middle, you actually, if you go to the editorial page, you'll often find pictures. Now you can say, now we know that there shouldn't be any pictures on the editorial page. It's just straight, give us the facts, give us the opinion, give us, But I always find myself gravitating toward the cartoons first. Because there's something that just, with a picture, that it just sums up something. Now, this is something that actually came out a couple of years ago, but it was sort of, during the campaign of 2012. I don't know if it's going to be wildly different this time around, but what it was talking about is here there's a beast. Some great savage monster here with the sort of horn back there looking down at this hapless little voter down there, taking the vote away. And it's a monster, it's a way of picturing the power of money to influence voters and to undermine true democracy. Okay? Now maybe it's changed radically since 2012, but that's another question.
Probably so.
What I find of interest here is that on the editorial page, someone was using a vivid word picture. Now, we know that, I'm not expecting to walk right out here and see some kind of a great lizard, walking down the streets of Minneapolis. I'm not expecting to find myself engulfed by this reptilian creature that somehow is threatening to rob me of my... But that's not what the author is after, and we know that. No, the author is not telling us to go out on the street and look for some lizard coming after you. We know that it's talking about the monstrous power of all of the folks who are out there using their wealth and influence to try and shape your opinion, and okay, so that's... And it's a way in which a kind of a satirizing, making this power of the money somehow seem ludicrous, so you can say, hey, wait a minute. That shouldn't be so intimidating after all. Now back in Revelation 13, the way in which satire works is that it has to take something familiar and then characterize it in a vivid, pictorial way. With that one, you have to know something about, how is money related to election policies and all that. We know that from other news sources, and what the cartoonist is trying to do is shape our perception of it with a picture. What's happening in Revelation chapter 13 is that Revelation is giving us a hard-hitting bit of commentary on the world in which the readers live. It's giving us a hard-hitting commentary using picture language. And what the writer will do is to take something that was known to the readers and then shape the way in which they see it. Now, the way in which this works is this whole idea of this monstrous creature with the 7 heads and the 10 horns. I mean, it's a horrific beast. And the remarkable thing is in verse 4. The remarkable thing is that people worship the dragon, for it's given its authority to the beast. People are impressed by this monster. They worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast? Who can fight against it? The beast, whatever it represents, has this impression of invincibility. Well, as we go down, it talks about the beast blaspheming God in verses 5 and 6. In verse 7, it was also allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. That the beast has this impression of invincibility, power to conquer people of every tribe and tongue and folk and nation, suppress them, put them under its power of its domination. Well, for people in John's time, who lived under Roman rule, conquest, the power to conquer, was one of the hallmarks of Roman authority, Roman invincibility. Sure what I mean? This is some artwork that comes from just down the road from the city of Laodicea. Okay, this is first century art, and it comes from an imperial temple at the city of Aphrodisias, which is just a little ways down the road from Laodicea. And this massive imperial temple, dedicated to the deification of power, to the deification of the state, to the deification of the Roman emperor, uses the theme of conquest as its hallmark. It's a central theme. Why should you be subservient to Rome? Why should you believe the propaganda that they're giving you? Why? Because they are invincible and their power to conquer is evidence of that. Here you can see Caesar Augustus. He's presented in the nude like a Roman, like a deity, somebody like Zeus from Mount Olympus. This is the goddess of victory. And in between, they're holding up the armor of their defeated enemies. That's the trophy armor. And down at the emperor's feet is this hapless victim, now being trampled down. And when you see this invincible power, the power to suppress, the power to trample, the response you are supposed to have is one of awe. Who is like the beast? Who can fight against this? Here's another one. If you keep going down the panels, one after another in the imperial temple. Here's one of Claudius, mid-1st century. And here you can find the Emperor Claudius, again, like a Roman deity here. And here is this hapless woman down here who represents Britain. And the emperor being able to suppress Britain, to conquer Britain, to say, you revere me because I am invincible, I conquer. It becomes a call to deify human authority, the deity of the state. What Revelation does is to say, yes, this is right. This is at the heart of what you're hearing. This is that at the heart of what you're being told is worthy of worship, is the deification of human power to conquer. And what John does with his picture language is to take that theme of conquest and turn it into a monster. So that what you're seeing is the savagery of that ideology. That to deify human authority, to deify Rome's power to conquer, is to be drawn in to the worship of a beast. Now, Revelation does this as a hard-hitting kind of thing. It was emphatically relevant to people of his time. I mean, if you go city after city after city, 29 BC, the massive temple to Augustus was built in the city of Pergamum, which is where some of the readers lived. 23 AD, a massive temple to Tiberius in the city of Smyrna. 89 AD, massive temple to Domitian in the city of Ephesus, and all of these temples in the smaller cities as well. It becomes a way of shaping loyalty, shaping allegiance. And that's the point of Revelation's imagery, is what happens if you deify human authority. Make it absolute. Now, as we look through this imagery, I mean more closely, people will often say, well, you know, there's a lot of similarity. Revelation is invoking biblical imagery. There's analogy to things that you find in the Old Testament. I mean, Daniel will picture empires rising out of the sea. One empire looks like a lion, another like a bear, another like a leopard, another like 10 horns. That yes, Revelation is echoing, invoking kinds of common imagery that people knew from reading their Bibles. That yes, these are all symbols of empire. And what Revelation does is to invoke them, to bring them all into one composite thing. Not just this empire, that empire, and that one, but it's the phenomenon of empire. It's the phenomenon of deification of human authority. The deification of the human power to dominate and subjugate. That becomes the pointed critique of a way of thinking. What Revelation does when you read it as a whole is that there's a very careful, striking juxtaposition of two forms of power. The beast and the lamb. Two of these word pictures functioning in tandem in this book. We've already been introduced to the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is Christ, the Lamb who was slain. The beast also is slain and yet lives. But where the Lamb represents the suffering that in turn is followed by resurrection, here the beast seems to be the irrepressible quality of power. We heard that the Lamb, you remember that John was introduced, he was told the Lion of the Lion of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered. That Christ's suffering, that Christ's death was a form of conquest, it was a form of victory, because through it, the power of divine love was revealed. The beast conquers not by enduring death, but by inflicting it. When we saw the Lamb in chapter 5, we were introduced to the Lamb who redeems people of every tribe and tongue and folk and nation and makes of them a kingdom and priests serving our God. Here the beast oppresses people of every tribe and tongue and folk and nation and makes of them his chattel and holds them in bondage. What Revelation is doing is raising this provocative question. There's the sense in which everyone belongs to someone. There are various forms of power in the world, and no one is a free agent. Everyone will be influenced by something. The question is what? What is it that has a claim upon your loyalty? What is it that has a claim upon your vision? Which is it that has a claim upon the way in which you see the world and your place within it? Because something will get a hold of you. The question is your life, your outlook being shaped by the deification of the power that oppresses, or through the suffering power of God, which makes free? That's the disturbing question that Revelation is raising for the readers. Everyone is influenced by something. The question is, what has got a hold of you? What gives you your sense of identity? Revelation assumes that worship isn't simply a series of rituals you go through. That worship is an expression of one's fundamental relationships, one's most fundamental relationships, one's most fundamental loyalties, one's most fundamental commitments come to expression in worship. And that's why Revelation takes it so seriously. Because what Revelation is doing is presenting the Lamb as the sharp antithesis to the forms of power that were seeking to hold the people in his cities captive, to a different ideology that was ultimately committed to human subjugation and not to human liberation, to oppression, not freedom, to enslavement, not redemption. Now we're going to go on in a minute. Questions thus far? So I want to go on and bring in one more image. Then let's see where it goes. What I'd like to do now is, in the scenes that follow, in chapters 14, 15, and so on, I mean, we'll see another series of threats and plagues, and then we'll be brought back into the heavenly throne room singing hymns again in chapter 15, and then we'll go spinning around, and there'll be some more plagues and so on. You get that? Revelation is a book for slow learners. You know, you kind of have to go around through some of these things multiple times. Okay, so we go through a series of threats, back to God and the Lamb. Okay, I got that now. Yeah. But then in chapter 17, we come up with another one of these images. Another one of these images that I want to bring into the picture, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this. By the time we get to chapter 17, we're going to be finding Revelation now introducing us to Babylon the Great. He's going to be using another one of these vivid word pictures. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and with the wine of whose fornication the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her fornication. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and averse abominations, and I saw that the woman was drunk on the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. Pretty gruesome stuff. When we get to the image of Babylon, it's again analogous to the image of the beast. Because John is using these vivid word pictures to present a kind of hard-hitting commentary on the world in which the readers live. When we think about this image, you know, and this is Durer again, kind of showing us this woman here, you know, the elegant woman all adorned in kind of, you know, gaudy jewelry, holding up a golden cup full of abominations, like holding a cup full of sewage or something. I mean, it's absolutely the most, you know, gruesome, satirical lampooning of a kind of what should have been a noble figure becoming debauched, degraded, riding on this strange beast. But again, okay, just a reality check. You know, on our editorial pages, we have people riding on beasts too. You know, it's kind of, okay, so here we've got, you know, somebody riding along on a great beast here, you know, charging along. I mean, this was from a little while back then. if you realize that what Revelation is doing is not so different from what we see all the time in the newspaper. He's not saying, hey, when you leave church today, start looking to see if you see some seven-headed beast riding, coming down the street with this strange drunken woman sitting on top of it. It's analogous to picturing, that we picture people riding on beasts that represent political entities. They used animals to represent political entities. We use animals to represent political entities. And so the question is, how does this provocative use of imagery work now? Well, it's interesting to ask, with this portrait of Babylon, this woman sitting on the beast now. So we've not only got the beast, but we've also got the beast's accomplice, Babylon the Great, this woman sitting on top. And it's interesting that Babylon is pictured as this woman, a prostitute. And the connotations for people of the time would be that, okay, so she's supposed to be seductive. There's something about her that people find absolutely intoxicating. But then John makes this turn. And that as we look more closely at this woman who should have been so seductive and intoxicating, we find that she's covered with blasphemous names, that she's obsessed with luxury, an insatiable appetite for gold and elegant clothes, and that she's characterized by brutality against the faithful. She's drunk on the blood of the saints. And you can see what Revelation is doing by bringing these things together. It's posing this question: how in the world can people find violence seductive? How in the world can people find brutality intoxicating? Now, of course, every time I go to the theater and I'm watching the previews, it is nothing but violence, right? I mean, it's always the car chase with the flaming automobile flying through the air and exploding, carnage in the streets and all this kind of stuff. And people are sitting there going, wow, cool. Or luxury. The material. What is it that's so seductive about owning stuff? What is it that people find so seductive about getting more and more of more and more? Can that be intoxicating? Is the power to buy stuff a kind of high? That's the way in which Revelation is portraying the society in which his readers live. One that's characterized by brutality and violence, by an insatiable desire for more, which people find absolutely intoxicating and seductive. And by using a word picture, it becomes a way of saying, oh, wait a minute, this is repulsive. It's a shock treatment to get people to see something differently than they had seen it before. Now, so you can actually see, I mean, in many ways what John is doing is John is acting as graffiti artist here. He's taking standard imagery and he's transforming it in a way that changes the way you see everything. Now, this is an image that you would see on Roman coins that circulated in the later 1st century. So you can get a Roman coin, you know, you'd have the emperor on one side, and you have, this is on the other side, the goddess Roma. And so, you know, just, here you've got the goddess that represents the city of Rome. She's sort of a noble figure. I mean, she's sitting there in a rather dignified pose. She's at ease. She's got a sword in her hand, but she doesn't need to use it right now. I mean, she's in control. She's sitting on 7 hills. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So Rome typically used feminine imagery for itself to represent its own city. At ease on the 7 hills, in control. Now what John does as graffiti artist here is he's going to take this image in which you're supposed to be impressed, that this is the way in which you're supposed to see the ruling power, dignified, noble, in control. And this is what John does. Is that John takes this noble lady and turns her into a drunken prostitute. And he turns the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hills on which the Roman is seated into the 7 heads of the beast on which the woman is seated. And he calls the woman by the name Babylon, which of course in biblical history, I mean, Babylon was the great conquering power. It was the great tyrannizer. It was the great devastator of the temple, the exiler of the people, the great oppressive power of powers. And Revelation is seeing its deja vu. And he uses that imagery to say, and are you impressed? Are you impressed? Or can you see that it would be ludicrous to think that they should have any claim on the values that shape your life?
You've made a great parallel here with the political power of Rome and its oppression of all the nations. You've also challenged us to think about this in our own terms.
Mm-hmm.
How can we think about this in our own terms when we uphold the principle of separation of church and state?
Oh boy. Can I go on a little bit further? It's not that I want to dodge the question.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But I think it's a difficult thing for us to read in view of the way we have structured our political world and the place of the church in it.
Yeah.
And I have to go to choir, so I can't wait.
Come back next week.
Well, let me go on and just keep thinking through some of this a little bit further. What happens in Revelation chapter 18, or by the end of 17, we're going to be finding that what happens is that John portrays evil, this power, self-destructive. What's so interesting is that by the time you get down to Revelation chapter 17, verse 16, you know, it talks about the 10 horns that you saw. They and the beast will hate the whore. They will make her desolate and naked. They will devour her flesh, burn her up with fire. It's interesting that in Revelation, the beast devours the harlot. It's a vivid image of Rome and the society that Rome represents. Self-destructive. That the power of brutality that's operating within the society finally comes full circle and becomes that society's own undoing. That society's insatiable desire to consume finally leads to it being consumed. There's no lightning bolt from heaven. It becomes the characteristics of the society, the destructive character of the society itself, that becomes its own undoing. Now, as we get into this chapter 18, we'll be finding that it portrays sort of the world in which Babylon goes. And in many ways, what you find in chapter 18 is that there's a whole series of lamentations over the fall of the great city. Some of the merchants and others are finding it so sad that this great commercial power, this great imperial power has finally collapsed. And when you get into the middle of chapter 18, there's chapter 18, verse 11. You're going to find the merchants of the earth weeping and mourning because there's going to be an economic collapse. I mean, their economy is based on Rome's power to dominate. And what would happen if you challenged that? They've got a vested interest in the status quo. So if there's any sort of potential for the society to implode, that would be bad for them. In verse 11, it says, the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her. I mean, it's a vision of the future in which the society will be no more in its current form. No one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold and jewels, silver and jewels and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet. All kinds of scented wood, all articles of ivory, all articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, spice. It's like you're going to the Mall of America here. You're getting an inventory of absolutely everything on the shelves. And then it goes down to the end of it there. You can buy sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. It's interesting that by the time you get to the end of it, that's the kicker. If you read it in Greek, Revelation actually uses slang. The slang word for slave was body. You can buy bodies in Babylon. And then Revelation adds, and the souls of human beings. Human beings reduced to commodities. The whole list, if you think about it in the world of Rome's time, I mean, gold and silver were imported from Spain and Portugal. Iron was brought down from Central Europe. Bronze was brought in particularly from Greece. This costly wood, citrus wood, that was a wood that was so expensive. I mean, I don't know, it would be like spending the equivalent of $100,000 to buy a single table. Little table. I mean, it was only the wealthiest of the wealthy that could afford it from this citrus wood. It was a rare thing from North Africa. North Africa was the breadbasket for much of the Roman Empire. They grow wheat along the northern coast here and siphon it off to Rome. Ivory. Pliny, for example, he was a Roman writer. He would complain that ivory was there was ecological devastation even then. The elephant population was becoming so devastated because of the ivory trade that they were having trouble getting enough to satisfy public demand. Spices being brought in from the east. And the slave trade, where he ends up, is actually right here. One of the principal places for the slave trade was the region where John's readers lived. Places like Ephesus, major slave exporting harbor, where the slave traders would go through the heart of modern-day Turkey, rounding up people. Sometimes the slaves were taken as captives in war. Quite often slaves were abandoned children. Families that had grown too large, they could not care for their children, they would abandon them, the slave traders would pick them up. They had human trafficking was common. One of the most interesting images that I've ever seen from this period is a slave trader's tombstone. It took a lot of digging to find it, but this comes from the 1st century. And it's interesting when you look at the inscription in here, the merchant identifies himself as a somat emporos, which is literally a merchant of bodies. This is the merchant up here. He's living the good life. You know, he's sitting here at a table, the picture isn't quite clear enough, but he's sitting here at a table, you know, covered with some wonderful fruits and that kind of thing. I mean, it's a very exquisite sort of a scene. This is his servant over here. You see how tiny he is? He's one of the little people, as it were, the lower downs. nothing in comparison to this fellow. Over here is a horse. For a person in the first century, a horse was like having a Mercedes or a Porsche or something like that. I mean, this was high-end transportation. In the middle of the scene, you see that what would support his lifestyle was trade in wine. Here people are bringing in the grapes from the harvest here. They're putting it in jars so they can take it out to transport it and sell. And what lies underneath all of this luxury is the turning human beings into commodities. Here's the slave trader, leading all of these people bound around the neck as his cargo for sale. All of these are men. Here are 2 women, and here are their children. All being debased, degraded into commodities in order to support his lifestyle. That's what Revelation is portraying through this imagery of Babylon. Talking about what does it mean to have a society in which human beings are reduced to commodities. That the misery of the many is the basis upon which the luxury of the few is based. And Revelation envisions a future that is really no future for a society that operates like that. Now, as we read all of this, and I've had to think about what does it mean? I mean, why does Revelation give us this vision of the sort of the destructive impulses in the society finally reaching their culmination and leading to the society's own destruction? Why tell us this? Is that, maybe in the words of Ebenezer Scrooge, are these things that must be or things that might be? Because obviously what Revelation is doing is trying to alter the way people see things and trying to alter the way in which they put their convictions into practice. One of the most interesting modern day analogies that I've run into, this whole idea of being given a glimpse of what would it mean to go to your own funeral and see how are people remembering you, what is the legacy? That's what's happening with Babylon. We're given this is where Babylon is going. This is what people will remember Babylon for. If you could go to your own funeral, what would people remember you for? What is the legacy you have left behind? One of the most powerful examples I've seen of this is the chemist Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel was a Swedish chemist who was the inventor of dynamite. He was active in the middle 19th century, and he got his start, manufacturing nitroglycerin, which was really volatile. I mean, it was one of the early powerful explosives that they would use in mining and elsewhere. But it was so volatile that they blew up one of his factories, and we got to find a better way to do this. So he found a way to harness that, turn it into a more controllable explosion. And he called it dynamite. From the Greek word dynamis, which means power. And so what he found was a way to harness destructive power as no one else had before him. Now Nobel was making a fortune with explosions, selling it to people in industry who wanted it to blast their way in terms of road construction or mining and so on. But he also made a fabulous killing, in more ways than one, in the defense industry, because people they were getting into the arms race that would eventually culminate in World War I. And these high explosive potential that he had helped to create was key to this. Well, Nobel one day woke up and saw his own obituary. You see, his brother had been killed in an accident, and the newspapers heard that Nobel had been killed, and they got the first name wrong. And so this was the obituary that he saw in the newspaper. The merchant of death is dead. Dr. Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding more ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. And that's what Nobel could see. If he had a chance to go to his own funeral, that was his legacy. That became the turning point. He had a Babylon-like experience. Nobel decided to make a change. And so what he did was, in his will, he took the wealth that he had accumulated through harnessing the power of destruction and created the Nobel Prizes. That's where they came from. From a recognition that the power of destruction was not going to lead to the future of the world. That he wanted to do whatever he could with his remaining resources to harness creativity in fields like literature and the sciences, and then of course the capstone would be the Nobel Peace Prize. What Revelation is doing through its images is a kind of intense shock treatment to people in his time, to jolt them into a way of seeing the world differently. Having portrayed the image of Babylon here, and tracing the ways in which the destructive capacities of Babylon will, if unchecked, continue on towards the city's own demise, the society's own demise. John will now do what he's done before and give us a positive image to counter it. The image of Babylon will be matched by the image of New Jerusalem. The image of Jerusalem is an image that is filled with hope. It's an image that absolutely stands for everything about life. It's the place where God, who created all things, makes all things new. And as John holds that out for us next time, we'll be seeing here again, this is God's will for the future. This is the Lamb's work for the future, to create life, not destruction. And his intent is that you may be claimed as readers of the text by that vision of life and vitality and the newness that God brings, which in turn creates a kind of resistance to the forces of destruction that would rob you and others in your own society of their life, their health, their dignity, by presenting a very different way of God's working in the world. So that's where we are right now. I'll hang around a little bit if you want to stop and chat a little bit. I got a couple books if anybody wants any of those things. Next time, New Jerusalem. So I'll see you next week. Don't use that.